Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting and giving 2-3 more minutes to people that are still coming so that they can have a seat, and then we're going to start with the event in 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for being here and welcome to our side event, High Stakes, Great Urgency, Collecting Evidence for Gender Just and Impactful Climate Policies. This is an event that is going to lead us and help us to understand from different perspectives how gender just and community-led climate initiatives are enhancing women's human rights while also contributing to mitigation and to adaptation policies and actions. This is also a very important event that will show us that gender is not an isolated topic, rather that lacks the connection with many of the issues that we are discussing here, such as just transition, mitigation, adaptation, is science, above all, finance. So this conversation that we're going to have today with the panelists will take us in a journey that will show us the multiple benefits that gender-sensitive climate actions bring, not to the well-being of the communities, to strengthening their national policies, but also to advance on the Paris Agreement. And when we are talking here about assessing, about evaluating the progress towards the Paris Agreement and carrying out the global stocktake, we must talk about the importance of collecting evidence, about collecting disaggregated data by gender, by ethnicity, by age, from an intersectional perspective, that it's going to allow us to have a greater clarity in terms, not only in terms of the impacts, but also in how different groups are contributing to face climate change and how we can strengthen the conversation towards more local, community-based solutions that has a high component on equity, and how important is to advocate on these solutions to get finance, to get capacity building, to get these solutions on the table, real solutions that are showing real benefits for the people. This year, WECF, together with the support of the GIZ, will launch a publication that seeks to propose simple but concrete methodologies on how we can or how grassroots organization can assess these multiple and cross-cutting benefits across the SDGs to advance, for instance, in the Paris Agreement, while taking into account transformative narratives that are not based in unequal economic systems, but that actually support alternative models, alternative responses to the multiple crises that we are facing today. And some of the exemplary actions that will be showcased are also today with us, are going to participate today in the event, and are going also to present how gender responsive and locally owned solutions contribute to climate mitigation, to adaptation actions, and also to policies. And the idea also behind that, I don't know what maybe people here in the room think, but since I started thinking about, I don't know, working with local communities, then during studies, and then now engaged in the policy space, I got always the feeling that there is a disconnection between people. Even though we have a same or a common goal or a common vision, it seems that people is talking different languages, even though we want to achieve a similar thing. So this is an opportunity, this is a space to open the door, to build those bridges, to start communicating, to start opening new spaces for exchanging experiences, exchanging views among local partners, practitioners, researchers, and also policymakers. And it's also a way in which we can show how these different views are interconnected, how they are complementary, and how they are also better or more effective when they act interconnectedly, when they act together. So today we're going to also hear about different contributions to the Gender Action Plan in activities like, for example, activity 8.4, which talks about the strengthening evidence base and understanding on the differentiate impacts of climate change to men and women, but also on how women and girls and different genders are agents of change to fight climate change. Also, it can contribute to the activity D.4 to support the collection and the consolidation of information, of expertise on the nexus, on the connection of gender and climate change in different sectors, in different thematic areas. So this event aims to underline the need to support the collection of evidence base and disaggregated data to demonstrate this impact, the impact of gender transformative solutions. So today we are going to have what I think is going to be one of the most exciting, diverse, inclusive panels that we're going to have here. And we will have our event mainly in English. However, we have some panelists that do not speak the language, and as we are very committed to make this event as inclusive as possible, even though the conditions of this space are still not tackling one of the main barriers to significantly participate, which is language. We are committed to make the best to strengthen these. So I don't know, I would like to first know if there is hay personas en el panel que hablen solo español? No. Can you ask him French, Anne, please, if there...
Est-ce que nous avons dans l'audience des personnes qui ne parlent que le français? Est-ce qu'il y a un besoin de traduction en français au micro? Je crois pas.
Okay, then it's good, but in case people come, we are also going to have some translation, live translation, but on text if somebody needs it. So then with that, I think that we can start also with a nice conversation, having some nice discussion with different panelists and invites today. And first, I would like to start talking to you, Agnes. You are the Executive Director of the Action for Rural Women's Empowerment, also known as ARUWE, in Uganda. And the work in your country and the work that you do in your country has demonstrated with concrete and also successful actions how community-based models can contribute for a just transition, can promote also gender equality. Also doing this by addressing some of the major challenges such as access to renewable and sustainable energy systems, as well as to finance. So to kick off this conversation, it would be nice for us to know what are those challenges that women face in accessing, using, and distributing energy in Uganda particularly, and how has been the process of transforming those challenges?
Thank you so much, Gina, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you so much for the question. I should say for a fact that the challenges are so many, and working in the rural areas of Uganda, specifically with women and children, the issues around, the challenges around energy are so much embedded in, mainly I should first call them the traditional constraints and the traditional gender roles in the families and the communities that the women have. It is so true that in our society, it is the role of the woman to make sure that everything in the household is attended to, including making sure that there's, food. And we can't prepare food without, a source of energy. So the challenges that come with that include for the fact that the woman has to make sure that there's, really accessing that energy that is not there. And predominantly, the fact that the woman most of them use firewood. It is the biggest challenge. They have to spend quite a lot of their time to look for that firewood. They walk long distances. I should tell you for a fact that because now the forests close to them have been depleted. In Uganda, I should say, for example, that it's 7% of the forest that has been depleted since 1990s, where it was 26. So you find that the woman would walk 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers to look for that firewood. The firewood that is not safe. It has health hazards because you need to prepare the food in that smoke, emissions, and that really brings a lot of issues around health. But not only health, the environment itself, because we are cutting down trees and they do not have really any alternative. And so that alone really brings in a lot of issues to do with time poverty, because they will not have a lot of time to invest in any other activities to do with development, because you take time to prepare for breakfast, you take time to prepare for lunch and dinner. And so all the time is so much spent on doing that. And the care support, working, make sure that you have your children attended to. And so the issues around accessing clean energy is something that is a problem. The other issue is lack of awareness, because where we work in the rural communities do not have access to information, and they do not have access to the right alternatives. For example, the renewable energy. They do not have, trainings, opportunities, and empowerment. And so it makes them work with the rudimentary methods, and that is really a biggest challenge. And the fact that usually in the communities that we are working with, like I said, for example, that lack of information, it brings in an issue of the male dominance, where men and other investors bring in these technologies. They do not really allow them to participate because they have not trained them. And so usually women at the end, they are really consumers. They've not participated effectively in the renewable energy value chain. And so it makes them really, really dependent on the technologies that is actually introduced to them, and without a lot of, involvement and participation, which is a challenge. And the other one is also lack of access to the tools and resources. And I should say the technologies. Like I said, if the only information and knowledge they have is firewood, they do not know that there are other alternatives, for example, solar or briquettes. And so the lack of technology and that awareness actually also is a biggest issue. And the other thing is really, really not enough financial support. Now, it requires for these, for example, before I get into how we have transformed them, it requires finances. Renewable energy really, really, especially upfront, you require some bit of finance to invest in some technologies that I have mentioned. And these are rural women that have not so much, they're so much living in poverty. And their priorities, looking after the children, making sure that the children really feeds and goes to school. The finance, when the financial support is not there, they will not have the right alternative. And so it really limits their also financial opportunities, because they are not so there. And so what have we done? What have we been doing as ARUWE? In partnership with WECF, we've had funding to work with cooperatives. We've been working with women cooperatives. We are building, because these women are participating in agriculture, as I said, as a source of income. And so we have worked with them in their in setting up cooperatives and structures. And these cooperatives are producer cooperatives. So much producing maize, grain, and beans. And so in these cooperatives, we are trying to empower them and build their capacities. And we have introduced a sector, what we call a renewable sector in their cooperatives, such that they can have, we use this as, you know, a benchmark, a ground on which they can understand, and we open their knowledge on renewable access and renewable knowledge. So we have tried to increase awareness to let them understand that it can be other technologies. And so we have built their technologies around briquettes, charcoal briquettes, helping them to use the, you know, farm reduce, animal reduce, to make sure that they can themselves as women, they can really manufacture, produce the briquettes that they can use instead of firewood, to save on the energy, to save on the firewood. And so we have, apart from awareness, we have trained them. The women themselves are the ones doing these technologies. We have introduced them to a number of technologies, photovoltaic, solar, and we have built their capacity around building and installing the solars themselves, the women. We have trained them in working and making sure that they can construct the stoves themselves. As you can see, the masons, the women masons in their cooperatives. So what happens, these cooperatives have a number of women. There can be, for example, 500 women in a cooperative. So what we are trying to do is to encourage the women to first to test the technologies themselves. And not only that, we are training them to be ambassadors of renewable energy. If it's not a biogas, if, for example, a woman can, if it's a cooperative and there are, you know, 50 households, if they can support each other, build local resources, because in the cooperatives, like I said, they're doing some agriculture, and if they can really have an income to save, to build a biogas, we want them to start, you know, training and helping each other in their cooperatives, starting with that small cooperatives before they go to the communities to build these, you know, biogas, but also to do the briquettes. We have made sure that this is not only for their, you know, first of all, the benefits that come with health, the environment, but the economic empowerment itself. So we want to make sure that it translates into income as well. So when they do the briquettes, when they use them, they can also market them in, you know, hotels, in schools, such that other people can also, you know, buy and use them. But the beauty also around this, the women are themselves that are ambassadors. They're making sure that they can go out and let the communities understand that some of these challenges that they're going through have alternatives. There's technology that is resilient, that there's the technology that is more sustainable, that can be used, and that can actually save and help them come through the challenges that I've mentioned, issues of accessibility, issues of health, and issues of, you know, making sure that the communities are conserved.
And yes. I think you have touched many different points that are very important to bring from, or to take from your experience in the community that you work, and is the importance of locally owned models, yeah, for energy systems. I think we have seen with all the current multiple crises, call it war, call it pandemic, whatever, however you want to call it, the importance of having these locally knowledge, technologies, access, and particularly for women and girls which face different challenges. And it's also, you talk about a lot in terms of the importance of recognizing that time poverty is an issue, that we need to talk about care work for a just transition, yeah, and that I think that aligns as well with different narratives and strategies in the national, but also in the international scenario. So just quite briefly, how do you see that energy cooperatives models contribute to the national strategy towards a just transition? If you can briefly say something about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gina. First of all, the goal and aim of the national strategy so much is to increase the use of modern renewable energy from the current in Uganda, which is 4% to 61%. And in general, the principle is to bring on board more stakeholders, specifically the policy calls them the poor, but when we are working with the rural women, for us we call them the vulnerable, to bring them on board and to make sure that they can also use, not only use, access, but also use. So what we are doing in terms of cooperatives, when we actually get into the cooperatives, one of the things that we have really worked on is increasing access, like I've said, to energy for women and community members, and specifically to the far-reach areas. Now, the policy talks about increasing access and use, but the challenge is that most of the rural women, the accessibility cannot come if they cannot bring the technologies close. And so what we have done in cooperatives is to make sure that it doesn't only stop to accessing, but trying to ensure that there is usability. And that usability is very important to make sure that it scales up from one cooperative to the other. And the issue in terms of making sure that it contributes to the strategy is the issue of cost. The issue of cost is very important. I must tell you for a fact that it's very difficult for them to access and use if the cost is not friendly. And these technologies that we are talking about are very cost effective because the women are in charge. And so they are trying to make sure that they put up the technologies that can be accessed by all of them. And of course, that's what I mentioned, to do for example, in the cooperatives, we're trying to make sure that there's the village saving component, where someone can save to make sure that they can do what? They can put that small plant, a solar plant in their home. But also time saving. We have really made sure that there's, at household level and cooperatives, that because the technologies are now available for them, that women can save and pay attention to policy work. They can participate in policy work, but they can also participate in paid jobs. These stoves that they are making, I must say for sure that they can make money out of it. In the strategy, there is an issue and principle of mainstreaming gender and poverty. And really, this is what is happening. So we want to make sure that the women themselves can really participate in lobbying and making sure that the processes that they take place can actually bring on board the local leaders. Because when we are doing some of this work, we want to provide evidence and, and data and surveys. And so we have really participated, the women have participated in, different surveys, assessments to understand exactly what their challenges regarding, energies are, and also to make sure that they're empowered enough to engage the local, authorities, the leaders themselves, and to demand to make sure that renewable energy is put onto the agenda. And the other issue is better, access to markets as well, as they're selling the briquettes. If it's used and making sure that there's, income out of what they are doing, we want to make sure that there's also increased accessibility to markets and to make sure that there's, what they're doing is enterprising for them. So the issue is making sure that the policy itself, as they participate, they do not only stop at local cooperatives, but also how do they participate at the national level in terms of advocacy, in terms of demanding, safe, and friendly, renewable policies. Yes.
Thank you so much, Agnes. And taking from your points and how the importance of how these models also contribute to national policies, how that also be an opportunity for new generation of jobs and also like official recognition. And this is something that quite align well with the work that ENDA Colombia has been doing in Colombia, in Bogotá, in which they have carried out a holistic urban model that has challenged different patterns of behavior. It has challenged different layers of discrimination to women recyclers with a solidarity economy model. Vicky, you are part of ENDA as the director of Colombia, of Bogotá, in Bogotá. And before we get into a little bit more into the model, which do you think are these structural barriers that women recyclers face and which has been the approach to breaking down these different barriers. And you can speak in español. Can we have the mic?
Now, yeah. So, Vicky, Gina estaba haciendo un contexto de ENDA Colombia. ENDA Colombia lidera un modelo holístico, urbano, que ha desafiado patrones de comportamiento y capas de discriminación con un modelo de economía solidaria. Tú eres la directora de ENDA Colombia y pues antes de explicar un poco más o a profundidad el modelo de ENDA, la primera pregunta tiene que ver con cuáles crees que son las barreras estructurales que enfrentan las mujeres recicladoras y cuál ha sido el enfoque para romperlas.
Gracias, Gina. Sí, muchas gracias, Gina. Vamos pues, ¿qué podría decir? Creo que hay varias razones y causas estructurales por las cuales se presenta la desigualdad de género en la población recicladora. Creo que de todos se sabe que la población recicladora es una población altamente vulnerable, que por razones de desempleo en nuestros países, la única forma de sobrevivir es buscando en la basura, vendiendo lo que los otros desechan. En ese sentido, esta población en general se ve abocada como una población vulnerable.
So some reasons and structural causes by why we have inequality in the recycled population is because this is one of the biggest, most vulnerable population due to the unemployment. They have to search in the waste and the garbage ways of sustain and gain some money for their lives.
Es así como una de las principales barreras es la desigualdad socioeconómica y la pobreza. Una pobreza que es persistente en este tipo de población y en nuestros países de Latinoamérica porque son países en el cual el crecimiento es excluyente e insostenible.
The first and the highest barrier in our countries in Latin America is the inequality, the economical and social inequality, because the growth is unproportional for this, especially for this population.
En esta población, más del 50% lo representan las mujeres y estas mujeres tienen un ingreso mensual de menos de un salario mínimo, que significa alrededor de unos $250. Por otro lado, el 10% de las mujeres no tienen vivienda propia, más del 50% no tienen un medio de transporte para recoger sus materiales propio y lo hacen con elementos de tracción humana. Por otro lado, el 72% de las mujeres son cabezas jefas de hogar y por otro lado el 42% de las mujeres no saben leer ni escribir.
So in the data of this population, of the recycled population, 50% or more of 50% are women, and of these women, 50% doesn't have how to recollect all the garbage and the waste in the streets, and 10% doesn't have an own property or house, and the 42% doesn't have social security.
La segunda, creo yo, barrera importante es los patrones culturales, patriarcales y discriminatorios, violentos y la cultura del privilegio. En ese sentido, las mujeres están expuestas a todo tipo de violación, son mujeres discriminadas doblemente por el hecho de ser mujeres y por el hecho de trabajar en la calle y en la basura. Sienten que la calle, que su espacio de trabajo es totalmente inseguro, tienen miedo y todo el tiempo son violentadas. Además, estas mujeres han crecido en familias muy violentas, hacen natural la violencia para ellas y nunca las denuncian.
The second barrier is the cultural stereotypes. these women suffer about double discrimination because they work at the street, and they is the double discrimination because they are women and also recyclers. Also, they feel really insecure because the street is violent and they feel fear. Also, sorry, and also because they have grown in a really violent households and really violent families. So this kind of violence, gender violence, is like naturalized and is normal for them.
Una tercera es la división sexual del trabajo y la injusta organización social del cuidado. En ese sentido, más del 50% de las mujeres se encargan de todo el trabajo reproductivo y productivo que no es remunerado. En este sentido, son las mujeres que tienen encima el cuidado de sus familias, el cuidado de personas que tienen incapacidades, que están enfermas, y por otro lado, no se les reconoce. Como en los diferentes países, el sistema del cuidado no es reconocido para las mujeres y por lo tanto pues no es pago. Estas mujeres trabajan de 8 a 10 horas al día, sumando el trabajo que tienen que hacer en la calle, el trabajo con su familia, y en este caso del modelo que estamos presentando son mujeres que hacen un trabajo comunitario, entonces tienen una triple jornada de trabajo y tienen una pobreza de tiempo porque no hay tiempo para poder recrearse, disfrutar, cuidarse. Al contrario, viven todo el tiempo cuidando a los demás.
And the third barrier is the injustice in the distribution or the inequality in the distribution of work and tasks, and this is on payment. So the care is not recognized as an official work or as a payment work. These women work more than 10 hours and they have like a triple working day because they are like they have to care family, they have to care their children, and also they have to go to the streets to search for garbage and waste, and they have or they work in the community. Also, with this time poverty, it's really difficult to the women has or spend time for themselves.
Y por último, creo que hay una última brecha, y es la concentración del poder y las relaciones jerárquicas en el ámbito de lo público. En ese sentido, no hay unas políticas de bienestar para las familias recicladoras y menos para la mujer. Ellas tienen un seguro social que es subsidiado, que es muy poco efectivo, pero no tienen una seguridad social frente a un sistema que le reconozca un nivel de pensiones, una seguridad por el trabajo que realizan. La mayoría tienen problemas de afectación pulmonar y otra serie de enfermedades que el Estado no sale a cubrirle este estado de bienestar. Por otro lado, dentro de las organizaciones de recicladores son altamente patriarcales, machistas, y más o menos un 15% acceden a puestos de dirección.
Another barrier is the power distribution in the public space. They don't have like a well-being policies for recycled population, no social security to cover the diseases related or due to this kind of work, and they don't have a pension system or they can have access to them. Also, into the community or into the recycled population, all this power distribution is really patriarchal and machist.
Y para responder la pregunta de Gina y cerrar esta primera pregunta, ¿cómo le salimos al paso a esta serie de causas estructurales de esta desigualdad? Es que implementamos unos modelos alternativos de economía social y solidaria con perspectiva de género, en el cual la apuesta es construir aquellos modelos de empoderamiento multidimensional de las mujeres, desde un enfoque diferencial y de género que incidan en las políticas públicas, que puedan velar por los derechos, luchar por los derechos de estas mujeres, que les permitan una garantía de sus derechos, en la construcción de que otro mundo es posible, de una construcción de una cultura justa e igualitaria.
So to answer the second question or the last part of the question, they solve or they try to turn down these barriers through the implementation of an urban and solidarity model where they train in empowerment and autonomy to women to defend their rights and to start thinking about in a community model to not only defend their rights but also to have to make advocacy, policy advocacy.
Thank you so much, Vicky. This introduction of solidarity economy model, I think, I don't know, maybe for some of our participants here, it might sound a little bit utopic because I think it's such a good example of an alternative to this brutal and, like a kind of capitalist type of system in which we have left aside the empathy, we have left aside to care about the others, to consider the time, the needs, the priorities of our own community. And I think that's something very, very important to highlight from this model. And we know that this model started with this community, it also engaged the women recyclers, and therefore it also has different benefits. So please let us know a little bit more about those co-benefits that the solidarity economy model that has been led by the women recyclers brings both to climate change, but also to their communities.
Este es un buen ejemplo de cómo el sistema capitalista nos ha llevado a olvidarnos precisamente de la distribución de las tareas y cómo dejamos de reconocer el trabajo que las mujeres tienen que hacer día a día en sus casas. La segunda pregunta es, ¿cuáles han sido los co-beneficios que el modelo de economía solidaria liderado por las mujeres recicladoras aporta tanto a la mitigación del cambio climático como a sus comunidades?
Vale, creo que uno de los aportes más significativos que tiene la labor de estas mujeres recicladoras es que dejan, en el caso de Colombia, permiten que, por ejemplo, en Bogotá, que es la capital de Colombia, estas mujeres recicladoras hacen que se reciclen 1.200 toneladas diarias de residuos que no llegan al relleno sanitario. Ahí ya hay un aporte significativo frente a la mitigación del cambio climático. Por otro lado, frente a las políticas nacionales de crecimiento verde para el 2030, la población recicladora y específicamente las mujeres tienen ese papel fundamental de aportar a ese crecimiento verde en el sentido de que aportan a la meta de reciclaje a nivel nacional y por lo tanto a la disminución de los gases de efecto invernadero.
Most significant benefits are, for instance, in Bogotá, they recycle 1,200 tons of waste each month, and they contribute also to the national policy 2030 of the green government, especially in the goal of recycling.
Por otro lado, tras la lucha de las mujeres de muchos años, 20 a 30 años luchando frente a tratar de visibilizar el papel de estas mujeres dentro de la economía del país, y porque es un trabajo invisible, un trabajo que no se cuantifica, que no se ve, han logrado a través de muchas movilizaciones y de lobby político, han logrado que se les reconozca el papel tanto ambiental y social de estas mujeres, y en el momento en Colombia hay unas políticas que dignifican la labor de las recicladoras y hacen que esta población la incluyan dentro de estas políticas, haciendo que se les pague por kilo reciclado, más o menos $20 por kilo reciclado.
These women have achieved the inclusion or the recognition of the recycled population and the importance in the national policies. Right now, in Colombia, we have this law that pay for each kilo recycled more an average of $20. So the other contribution of these women is like they have worked in the communities for more than 20 years in demonstrating and doing political lobby about the importance of this work, about the importance and recognize the contribution specifically to mitigation of the climate change in the country.
Otro de los cobeneficios es la potencialización de liderazgos y el reforzamiento de las habilidades y las capacidades de las mujeres. En ese sentido, es la posibilidad que las mujeres empiezan a hacer un trabajo en lo público, es el transitar de lo privado a lo público y el hacer una lucha en pos de unos beneficios comunes.
This model has strengthened the fight or the pledges of the women and has strengthened and empowered women to mitigate, to move from private to public spaces and raise their voices about, again, the importance of recognize their labor and their work at the streets and the importance to recognize in a monetary way.
También es la implementación de estos modelos de economía social y solidaria con perspectiva de género que permite empoderar a las mujeres y que permite romper esos modelos capitalistas patriarcales a pasar a otros modelos donde se reivindican valores de solidaridad, de corresponsabilidad, en los cuales hay un trabajo conjunto y colectivo desde lo comunitario para lograr superar esas brechas de pobreza.
They have tried to, or they have achieved to break all this patriarchal pathway when they try to educate the community in solidarity and community values. So right now, the women are strong and they are empowered to raise their voices and also to teach all the community about the awareness of recognize their labor, recognize the division of tasks into the community or into the system or the recycling community.
Thank you so much. And we have heard from you amazing models. We have also heard from Agnes alternative models and the importance of collecting evidence to understand which are the differentiate impacts. When we collect data, when we do different type of assessments, we are able to recognize different needs, different priorities, different strategies for actions. And something that we have heard in the last intervention has been this importance of understanding or having this behavioral change within the community and how we can do that. And our next speaker, Fatou, has been also working in this. She has also a long trajectory. Now we are going to switch to French. So I think it's really nice when your brain is going to switch from English to Spanish, from French. I think that's very good for the brain. You know, we get creative while we learn good stuff. And do not worry, because our speakers are still following the conversation, but via transcript, so they are not going to miss any of the conversations that we are going to have here. But before we go to Fatou, we are going to share a nice video that I hope works. Yeah.
Je m'appelle Fatou Ndoye, je suis à ENDA Graf Sahel où j'aide les femmes du secteur de la pêche, particulièrement celles qui sont dans le delta du Sahel, dans la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique et la surpêche. Nous soutenons les femmes dans leurs actions de reboisement de mangroves pour une pêche durable et une autonomie économique. Nous avons donc introduit des foyers améliorés, sobres en carbone, pour la transformation du poisson et des coquillages. Ainsi, la consommation de bois est réduite de 75%. Nous avons formé les femmes dans la prise de parole et le leadership pour qu'elles intègrent les comités de régulation de la pêche. Donc les femmes défendent leurs droits et contribuent à la création de zones protégées avec le reboisement de la mangrove et l'ensemencement des coquillages.
Merci.
I think that with this video and the last conversations, people cannot come to us and tell us that gender is not everywhere. I mean, like, it's just the evidence is there. We have been talking about energy cooperatives for a just transition. We have been talking about urban models, no, for waste management, and now we come to mangrove restoration in different regions, in different languages, in different forms. So I think this is just exemplary evidence that gender must be in all the conversations and in all the agenda items. So Fatou, you are the coordinator of ENDA Graf of Sahel, and within your work you integrate quite well. Oh, this is kind of you integrate very well the gender and climate justice approach in the work, and we would like to know a little bit more about how the activities that you have conducted, you together with the women fishers, do they contribute to shift these gender power relationships in the fishing and mangrove sector in the Saloum Delta, but also in Senegal, because we know that this is a very male-dominated sector. So how it has been the change, the shift of these power relationships, and you can please speak in French and then we would translate. Thanks.
Vous m'entendez? Oui. Donc Fatou, comment est-ce que les activités que tu conduis avec ENDA Graf Sahel en tant que coordinatrice d'un pôle a transformé les relations de pouvoir entre hommes et femmes à l'intérieur du delta du Saloum, dans le secteur de la pêche, mais aussi à l'échelle nationale au Sénégal?
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Et très heureuse d'être là et de partager notre modeste expérience. Peut-être rappeler tout simplement le contexte du delta du Saloum et du Sénégal en général. Le delta du Saloum est une zone qui regorge de biodiversité, avec des forêts de mangroves, comme vous l'avez vu dans le film, aussi beaucoup d'espèces de poissons et d'oiseaux, mais aussi un écosystème menacé par les impacts du changement climatique, du fait de l'avancée de la mer et de la salinisation des terres, qui font que de nombreuses, en tout cas, personnes sont aujourd'hui victimes de ce changement climatique et elles sont en train de travailler et de développer des initiatives.
So the context first. The Saloum Delta is a very rich ecosystem, very rich in biodiversities, with mangroves, with a lot of fish, different species of fishes, of birds, and where a lot of people are living. But this ecosystem is greatly threatened and impacted by climate change. Especially there is a salinization of soil. The resources is depleted, and so a lot of people, a great number of population are affected by this ecosystem depletion. But women living there are putting in place strategies to adapt to climate change and also to mitigate climate change.
L'autre aspect comme contexte que je voudrais rappeler aussi, c'est lié à la pêche, parce que, comme vous le savez, le Sénégal est un pays qui développe le secteur de la pêche. Et ce secteur emploie plus de 700 000 personnes dans le domaine. Mais aussi, ce qu'on peut dire aussi, c'est que les ressources tirées de la pêche permettent à près de 75% d'avoir en tout cas des sources protéiniques dont les besoins en protéines sont couverts par le secteur de la pêche.
So let's look at the context of this sector, this food sector of fishing. It employs around 700,000 people in Senegal, so it is a very important sector. It also provides food security, especially protein sources, for about 75% of the population.
Donc, globalement, nous sommes dans un contexte marqué par les changements climatiques, mais en même temps, les océans aujourd'hui sont ravagés plus ou moins par l'industrie de la pêche, parce que les bateaux étrangers, mais aussi c'est des océans qui constituent des alternatives pour des stratégies d'atténuation comme des stratégies d'adaptation par rapport aux femmes.
So, of course, we are in a coastal area, so oceans are being depleted by industrial fishing. That is also the context we're facing. Oceans resources also represent an opportunity in our context, and especially for gender equality and for the women that are in the Saloum Delta.
OK. Et par rapport à ça, maintenant, face au changement climatique et la déperdition de certaines ressources, les femmes se sont mobilisées pour revaloriser les connaissances traditionnelles à travers des ensemencements d'arches, à travers tout ce qui est développement, par exemple, de la jachère au sein des océans, mais aussi de repiquage de la mangrove pour justement permettre à la ressource de se régénérer.
So women have rehabilitated ancestral knowledge, like reseeding activities, like replanting in the mangrove. And in this sense, they are using their own knowledge.
Et donc, on se rend compte qu'en fait, ces impacts du changement climatique surchargent les femmes parce qu'elles sont obligées de développer d'autres initiatives de care environnementale, ce qui allonge leurs besoins, ce qui allonge leur temps de travail. Et c'est à partir de là que des diagnostics qui ont été menés entre les hommes et les femmes nous ont permis justement de développer des activités de co-responsabilité pour justement permettre aux hommes de s'impliquer davantage dans ces initiatives comment dirais-je encore, dans ces initiatives aussi bien de care environnementale, mais aussi de s'impliquer dans des activités de reproduction.
So these environmental activities that women conduct add to the burden of work that they already are carrying. And talking to them that has led ENDA Graf Sahel to conduct a diagnosis to identify the labor division inside the household of unpaid care work and be able to identify the really much higher burden of women, of work of women.
Okay. Et par rapport à cette implication, donc à la co-responsabilité que nous avons notée, les femmes ont pu libérer du temps pour pouvoir maintenant, avec les renforcements de capacités qu'elles ont eus en termes de leadership, en termes de gestion, en termes d'organisation, de tout ce qui est aspect lié à l'activité de gestion, etc., les connaissances des textes de la décentralisation et autres, ça a permis aux femmes de pouvoir maintenant accéder aux instances de décision et aussi de s'impliquer dans les comités de gestion des pêches qui étaient uniquement réservés aux hommes. Et aujourd'hui, elles participent dans ces instances de décision justement pour pouvoir parler de leurs questions et d'être aussi, de prendre la parole.
So the diagnosis resulted in co-responsibilizing, so better sharing between women and men of the responsibility of household work. And that freed up some time for women to be trained on local policies and how they can be involved in those policies. And so they have started to be elected in the local fishery committees. Mm-hmm. And that is very important. I'm going a little bit over the translation, but because there were only men in those committees, right? Mm-hmm. In the moment where fisher women are coming in the regulation committees, they can defend their rights. So now women are in the fishing committees and in policy committees, in the public policies.
Mm-hmm. That's really good work. That's an amazing work. I think everyone is very impressed in the room, but there are many different diagnoses, and we have been talking about how this is a male-dominated space. So how, like, which methodologies have you used in those activities, like going a little bit more deeper, and if you could also briefly talk to us, which other community data collection needs do you find that are relevant? If you can briefly talk about that.
Donc, donner un échantillon des méthodologies que vous avez utilisées pour ce diagnostic, mais aussi quelles autres données vous avez besoin de collecter aujourd'hui.
Bon, parce que, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, nous avons surtout travaillé sur la recherche-action, parce que, comme vous le savez, notre philosophie, c'est la recherche-action-formation. C'est pourquoi nous nous nommons Graf Sahel, Graf, G-R-A-F. Donc, par rapport à ça, toute action que nous démarrons part d'un diagnostic qui nous permet d'avoir la situation de référence. Et comme je l'ai dit tantôt, par rapport à ce diagnostic, l'objectif était de pouvoir démontrer aux hommes que les femmes sont surchargées. Et comment nous avons fait? Nous avons utilisé des outils de genre, notamment le budgétant, pour montrer aux hommes, les femmes démarrent le travail parfois à 3 heures du matin et ne s'achèvent qu'à 21 heures. Et par rapport à ces outils démontrés, les hommes ont compris en fait qu'il est nécessaire de faire quelque chose, il est nécessaire de s'impliquer davantage. Et au-delà de ces études, des focus group que nous organisons, nous faisons aussi des enquêtes ménages. Et à travers cela, nous avons fait une enquête ménage de plus de 200 personnes, 200 ménages interrogés. Et ces ménages nous ont permis en fait que petit à petit, les hommes commencent à s'impliquer dans certaines activités de reproduction, notamment partout, mais quand même, le fait d'aller chercher du bois, le fait d'aller chercher de l'eau, tu vois, pour réduire le temps de travail des femmes, ce sont ces aspects-là qui nous ont permis quand même d'avoir un aspect pour rendre.
ENDA Graf Sahel conducts research, action, and training. The diagnosis was conducted first through focus groups and then through an inquiry, a survey around 200 households. The objective was to demonstrate and to show to men that women have a much higher burden of care work. Using gender tools, one of them is an assessment of the daily routine of men and women and to compare it. It's very simple, but that shows you that women in Senegal, in the Saloum Delta, start their work at 3 o'clock in the morning when they stand up, and they end at 9 o'clock in the evening. Now, what happened is that men realized that that was maybe a bit too much, and they could share some of these responsibilities. And so now they, for example, conduct some activities like irrigation, getting water, or wood collection, or also taking the children to school, which takes a lot of time, burden out of the women.
D'autres enquêtes que nous menons aussi, c'est de montrer vraiment la contribution des femmes dans les activités, notamment en termes de sécurité alimentaire. Là aussi, c'est des enquêtes nationales que nous menons. Et d'ailleurs, il y en a encore en cours pour permettre d'identifier le nombre de femmes qui s'activent dans le secteur de la pêche. Tout ceci, c'est des éléments qui nous permettent d'avoir des actions au plan social, économique, les revenus, la contribution des femmes dans l'éducation des enfants, la contribution des femmes, etc. Donc, de pouvoir vraiment mesurer ces impacts-là. Mais aujourd'hui, nous, ce qu'il nous faut, c'est vraiment avoir des enquêtes qui nous permettent vraiment de montrer réellement la contribution des femmes au niveau de l'environnement, au niveau de l'atténuation, au niveau etc., pour vraiment porter un plaidoyer et pouvoir contribuer dans les CDN du pays, par exemple. Ça, ce sont ces aspects-là, cet engagement-là que nous voulons avoir ces jours-ci.
So, what we need now to measure better, and we have already conducted surveys, is how women at the national level actually contribute to food security, and also how they contribute to climate mitigation actions, especially, you haven't told about it, but there are some renewable energy equipment that you are working into. So What is needed is now to measure tools that will enable us to measure very precisely what is the climate contribution of these women fishers regarding also energy transition. And I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, and I think that it's a very good bridge actually to the conversation and what we were talking or what we were emphasizing at the beginning, and is the diversity of perspectives, the diversity of angles to move towards gender-responsive climate action. And you have Fatou's example has been emphasizing the need of different methodologies on different assessments, how they have been conducted. And this is a good bridge on how also research institutes can bring and can contribute to this space, working together with local communities, understanding which are the needs, how we can also contribute with other new methodologies, indicators, and different assessments, because these can also feed into the different national policies. And you were talking about food security, also the importance of agriculture. So it's nice now to welcome also Nicoline. It's a pleasure to also have you here among the panelists. You are the director of the CGIAR Gender Platform, which aims also to strengthen the research and innovation methods on tools to improve the quality of global gender research and also the different interventions with a more holistic approach. So you work in the nexus of gender inequities, of climate change, and agriculture transformation. So please give us a little bit more of input on why is research and data so important in this nexus?
Thanks again for giving me this opportunity to talk about a passion that's close to my heart. I think all three speakers up to now have shown how important it is to actually bring out the stories of what we do. But I think we need to take it the next level as well. And I think that's where if we really want to have impactful policies, for instance, we need to have also rigorous evidence behind it. I think that's important, and we're really trying to figure out also how we use qualitative data to become rigorous. So that's one thing we really do. We're basically a platform of gender researchers that work on agriculture across the world. I myself am based in Kenya, in Nairobi, where I run this platform. Under this topic of why data and evidence is so important, I wanted to give you 3 reasons, and I hope you agree with at least one of them, if not all. So my first reason is, let's be honest, gender is emotive and personal. Whenever you go into a conversation on gender, people bring in baggage, positive and negative, and everybody experiences gender differently. So let's be cognizant of that, and let's start there. That also means that we actually need to get the good data and the good evidence to actually move forward. I think that's very important, because otherwise it'll continue being an emotive conversation that a lot of people, and I've had this happen so many times to myself, you start talking and they shut down. So let's start figuring out how we can have a broader and a better conversation on this. And I think data and research follows in that. So that brings me to the second point. Why is data and research in this space very important? We still need, and thanks to all these my co-panelists, we still need to make the invisible visible. I think that's so important, and I think the whole thing about the care economy, that's invisible at the moment. So we need the data to show that we're actually making it visible. Simple things like Fatou was showing how much time women spend on this and men spend on this. Those are the things that are good and that will help us in our conversations on gender. So that's very important. There is such a lack of data, even gender disaggregated data is not there. We've been shouting this for years and years, and we'll continue shouting this for years and years, in part because gender disaggregated, something very simple that we as researchers realize, gender disaggregated means twice your budget. I know I sound simple, but if we don't figure this one out, and if we don't put the resources behind it, we're never going to have gender disaggregated data. Because the simple reason is, if you want gender disaggregated, you have to talk to 2 people in a household, not just one. It's as simple as that, but if we don't get those thinkings going forward is one. Part of that making the invisible visible is also the analysis. I think we need to push the analysis much more. And I see this very much in the climate change debate. Somehow we always ask the same question, are women overburdened because of climate change? The answer is always yes. So we're asking the wrong question. We need to do better analysis of how we can actually get women into as part of the solution, as part of agents of change in that, and not constantly talk about how women are, victims of we're not victims. We are agents that can help and change the world, and at this point we need everybody on board. So I think that's very important as we move forward. Another part of pushing, making the invisible visible is also having better framings. Again, gender research in and of itself, especially in agriculture, is very young. I mean, we have hundreds of years on breeding of crops, but we only have recent 20 years or so of really gender in agriculture research. So we need better framings. And we're working on that very much by getting people to think about, when you have a project, what are you trying to do with your project? Are you trying to reach people or women? That's relatively simple. You give them a technology and you've reached them. Are you trying to benefit them? We have to start thinking about what do they need to be benefited, So, okay, benefiting, great. We work a lot on that too. But last but not least, are women being empowered by what we're giving them? And what do we need to actually do to empower them? And I think things like this is actually trying to figure out that framing, that theory, the real, and only that way are we going to be sustainable. Recently, we've been starting to work much more on gender transformative approaches. How do you actually transform the norms in a society, especially in agriculture, which is often very traditional? How do you change that? And I think those debates are what important. Now, my third point, why data and research is important, and especially at this nexus, I would say is that because all of a sudden we have 3 very complex areas coming together who've done years of research, each one independently. So how do we bring it together? But we can, and at that point we can have transformation. So when I talk about the 3, I talk about gender, which I've just talked a little bit about. I talk about agriculture. There's a lot of research out there on agriculture. There are a lot of technologies out there on agriculture. But a lot of them haven't really understood the women's needs. So let's revamp some of that and figure out, what do we need for women to actually be powerful in agriculture? So that's one of those areas. And I do not mean, let's pink it and shrink it, but let's actually figure out what are the technologies that women need in agriculture to empower themselves. And then last but not least, climate change. That's a whole complex area as well. But if we bring those together, we can change things. And we really need to understand that. But it needs to be evidence-based, and it needs to have rigorous methodology behind it. Because otherwise, we will continue having these conversations. We will continue to be seen as a fringe part of it. We need to really up our own game as we move forward on this. So that's sort of my thinking about your question. I hope I've answered it, and I hope most people agree with at least one, if not all 3 of my reasons why we need to invest in data and evidence. So.
No, I think you have convinced us, no? And if not, then I would like to see your question at the end. Okay? No, don't feel the pressure. But that has been amazing. And also part of this conversation or this presentation and this panel today has been entitled Great Urgency and High Stakes. Yeah? But we know that sometimes research can take long. Yeah, so the IPCC, it takes some years to come with some robust and good conclusions, right? So it takes a little bit long, and we are in times of urgency. So how do you see the role of research actually evolving in this debate and in this big call of urgency? We need that now. So how do you see that?
She, of course, asks a very complex question, because, of course, everybody's like, well, if we give you money for research, we will only get the results in 5 years' time, etc. And yes, that's true. I do think that often researchers, and part of it's the whole process, we want our journal publications, and that takes an extra year, etc. Having said that, I also think that there's a lot of research out there that we can build upon. And so I think that's one area, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I also think that if we don't do the research, we might be doing things wrong. You know, and if we don't, especially women who don't have many resources, if we say, go women, go do this and this, and we've seen that a lot with climate smart agriculture, often it means a lot more labor for women. And that's not fair. I mean, that's just not fair. So we do need research that's very much more here and now, not stuff that happens, you know, over time in the long run, but here and now. So developing much better monitoring systems so that we can actually monitor what we're doing and how that has implications on women, I think is incredibly important. But let me just quickly, and if you can put on the other slide. So one of the things we've been doing recently as part of our work through a grant from IDRC, from the Canadians, is actually what we're looking at is gender climate hotspots and agriculture in essence. So what we've done is we've used data that's out there. And this took us about 4 months to get the right people together, get it going. But what we did is we layered gender inequities in the world, agriculture, where women are often involved in agriculture, and last but not least, where are the climate hotspots? And by doing this, what we can show is you will see that there are certain countries that are really where inequities are growing. And if we can't, you know, deal with the whole world, because we don't have resources to deal with everyone, let's at least start targeting our work better, and start targeting where we need to intervene now before it becomes even worse. Because once it becomes worse, bringing it back up is a lot more money. So what we've done in these countries as well is then in the country also looked in which in the areas in those countries are. The next part of this project will be to actually look at what are some opportunities and some activities like what all these women have been doing and working on. How can we scale them up? Because I think that's also, let's use the research we know, what we have, and move forward. Let's not wait until, like I say, the results come out. So I think research is important, and yes, it takes time, but there's enough out there for us to build upon. So I think that's also an important point. And just quickly, if anybody wants, this is the report. Vivian has some more. It has quite some interesting stuff, but like I say, we wanted to really, because again, it goes back to having everybody talk about, you know, women as a big endogenous, homogeneous group. Let's start targeting better. Let's use our money better. Let's figure out where we need to intervene. Let's not just constantly say women are, you know, a homogeneous. I still find it funny because even here, the whole conversation is usually with fishermen, and so we often don't talk about fisherwomen. And so even our language on gender and in agriculture is complicated and against the nuance we need as we move forward. So let me hold it there, because I know Priscilla still has a lot to say. And if anybody has any questions, please do come back to me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It has been an amazing intervention, and you have brought so many points. Like, I have captured also how intersectionality plays a role in research.
Yeah.
No, it's not only part of the actions, of the narrative of an activist movement, but it's also part in research, and we need to put it here. And such initiatives, such projects like this map show this evidence, show this data in a very concise, in a very user-friendly way that people can use it, but particularly that national governments can also take on. Yeah, it's how we are translating all this information, all this evidence, how we can have taken indicators, gone through a different process of assessment, quantitative and qualitative, to come up with such map where people can easily understand and know which action, which policies to target. And with that, I think I come to our next panelist, Priscilla. Yes, you're beautiful, Priscilla. The Women Environment Program, also known as WECF Nigeria, as a leading feminist African NGO and also an active member of the WGC conducted an ambitious program with the Nigerian Ministry of Environment to bring the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan at the national level and adopt in 2020 the National Action Plan on Gender and Climate Change for Nigeria. So Priscilla, you as the director and founder of Web Nigeria, you have been very involved in this process, right? So how have been feminist and civil society involved in this process?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by saying that first and foremost, it had to do with the political will and the willingness of the activists and also of the civil society and that of the government to work together. Right after the Paris Agreement and where GAP was adopted, WEP went back, taking this into consideration that a GAP has been adopted at the UNFCCC. So as Nigeria, what can we do together to make sure that the GAP was domesticated? Now, we approached the ministry, and of course the political will to say, yes, we're going to do it was there. And so first and foremost, we started with a consultation, a national consultation for a 3-day program where we had the civil society, we have the feminists, we have the academia, we have the private sector, including people with disability and the traditional institutions and religions, who came together for these 3 days, and we looked at the GAP, which was adopted at the UNFCCC, and we reviewed it. After reviewing it, we said, look, there was a need for us to also have a GAP for Nigeria, and that was where the process started. We, together with the Ministry of Environment, we went around the country canvassing from all the 6 geopolitical zones. Nigeria operates a federal system, so we have the federal, we have the state, and we have the local government. But we also have the 6 geopolitical zones, and so we went through the 6 geopolitical zones, canvassing and getting inputs to what they wanted to see. But before we went there, based on the consultation that we had, we already had like a draft of what we wanted to see taken from the GAP at the UNFCCC. So when we developed this, we took it to the states, and when we took it to the states, there was a lot of contribution from all these institutions, including the private sector and the feminists. So from the zonal to the state, and then we came back. And then Nigeria has what we call international, they have what we call ICC. ICC means International Inter-Ministerial Committee on Climate Change. So they have this, and all the ministries came together to also review the plan that we had. After reviewing, we still went back to the field to showcase to all the 6 zones, the political zones, and all to the stakeholders to say this is what has been developed. It took a period of 6 years. This was from 2015 to 2020. Okay, yeah, about 5 years, because the GAP was adopted in 2020, August 12 precisely, and which was presided by the federal government of Nigeria, the president of Nigeria, who was the person that accepted and said, look, this is what we have come out with as a Nigeria, and we're interested in this. And he appended his signature to approve the GAP. So it took several years of consultation. But because of the political will that the ministry and the government itself had, we were able to achieve this. Because the political will, without the political will, there's no way we would have been able to achieve that. But because they were interested, and all the parties that we met with and we conversed with, and with the support of several partners, both international and local, including WECF through the Women 2030 project, GAGA and both ENDA and UNDP and SIGA, who supported us, we were able to achieve this. Because without all this, we wouldn't have been able to achieve it. But also, one of the lessons that we learned from that consultation was that if civil society and feminists are able to push, the government will do it. because we saw it happening. And this thing can change, we can change a lot, because we continue to push, even when the government kind of was relaxed. We didn't relax. We felt that this is a key issue, and so we needed to take it up. And we continued to push and push and push. And government was like, okay, let's have this so that we can rest. But at the end of the day, they are taking the glory, because Nigeria was one of the first in the whole of Africa to have a gap. And after having the gap, we have also gone ahead to make sure that we have the framework of implementation, because it's not just enough to have a gap, but how do we implement this? And Nigeria, we continue to push. For the first time, the national budget of Nigeria has a budget for the implementation of GAP. That is the first time in the history of Nigeria. And this is because of the work of the feminist and civil society organizations, but also with the political will of the government to make sure that this thing is being heard. Once you have people that are in place, especially in the government, that, are kind of in tune with your vision, you will be able to achieve a lot. And that is what we saw. And even when they're not in tune, the work of the civil society and the feminist organizations, and feminists such as ours that we are sitting here, is to try to convince them. And I've always told my colleagues that when you come fighting, in most cases you will not get it. What you need to do is look at different strategies, entry points of how you can get your message passed across and how you can get your issues be adopted. And that is the strategy that we as an organization, WEP, use together with the government. When we know that if we go formal and we can't get what we wanted, we had to go through the other means, even in informal ways, to be able to get this gap adopted. So it was one of the things that we got. And of course, I know another question that is coming, which I will just answer before you go forward. When the challenge is that when you speak last, you are always at a disadvantage.
Go ahead.
This gap was developed in tune with the NDCs. You know, the first NDCs that Nigeria submitted had nothing to do with gap. There was no single of gender in that gap. And it was from this background that we felt that the NDCs that have been developed now needs to be mainstream. Gender needs to be mainstream. And so with our gap, we have 5 thematic areas. And one of them is agriculture, forestry, and land use. You know, you talked about the issues of agriculture, which is very key. The sustenance and livelihoods of millions of people, especially Africans, the subsistence farmers, rely on land and agriculture. So we felt that that is a key issue. And this is what we got throughout canvassing and consulting with the people around the country. The second issue had to do with issues of food security and health. This is one of the areas that majority of the people that we consulted felt that it's an issue that we need to take on. The third issue has to do with issues of energy and transport. My sister from ARUWE talked, very much about the issues of energy and the challenges that women are facing. This was one of the issues that even when we were consulting, kept coming up every minute, and the issues of transportation. Unfortunately, when we discuss about transport, nobody looks at the transportation, especially system in Africa. In here, you have all transport systems that in most cases favor women, but in African context, we don't have. The infrastructures are not even there. And even women farmers, they find it very difficult to bring even their production to the markets to sell. And so that is a very huge issue. And then we look at the issues of waste management. My sister from Bolivia, Colombia, talks so much about the issues of how they've been used. They have been using waste management for recycling, and how that has been empowered women. We brought that up on board as well. And lastly, the issues of water and sanitation. Africa is facing a lot of challenges when it comes to water and sanitation. And these are the key areas that was brought up in the gap. And now the gap has been developed. We have done the strategic, the framework for implementation. And to go ahead, the Ministry of Environment through the federal government has started the implementation of this gap already, because they have now started consulting with the several geopolitical zones creating awareness about the gap so that everybody knows, including the people at the grassroots. Remember that I said Nigeria operates a three-system tier of government, from the federal to the state to the local government. Now, the ministry is going to the local government together with WEP to make sure that this gap is not just a gap at the federal level, but a gap that transcends beyond that. And at the same time, as an organization, taking from the gap, we have also tried to look at the issues that are captured in the gap. And here, we've been implementing a lot of, done a lot of work. Here we have a guide to preparing organic fertilizer and pesticide, especially for rural women. Because what we have, it's free. You can take it after. Because what we see happening is that a lot of chemicals are being used on farmlands. And these are destroying the soil and the land. And so, WEP as an organization, which is part of the solution or part of the gap action that WEP is taking to make sure that this thing is being implemented, and we're teaching rural women on how to use organic fertilizer for their farming. I thank you.
Wow. Wow. A big applause for all. I think the only thing I can say is wow. This is just amazing. We have some minutes for some quick questions. If you have, anybody has maybe a question for the panelists. I see one question here. Oh, I see many questions are rising like sunflowers.
Thank you so much for giving this very insightful presentation by excellent panelists. I had come a few minutes late, so I missed the first part. My question first is to Gina. And second is to Dr. Nicoline, and third to Dr. Priscilla. I want to know more about WECF, whether it has an address in Germany or not, and how it is formed and all this kind of thing. So we can talk later.
Yeah, we can come to that later. Thank you, but thank you.
And on energy, solar, whether for women to train, I don't know whether you have a guideline that could be used as a synergy for other countries, especially in the rural area. And for Dr. Perez, and you talked about research, and it was very interesting because what we need to do is to find a way of making that change. And a lot of the time for women like me, who is a diaspora and who is a professional, the research is there, but somehow you are not able to take part because you are a diaspora. You are not living in Africa, and therefore you are like you are not even treated like an African, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and also the issue of funding. So this is other things what I can discuss with you. And for my sister from Nigeria, I had attended quite a few things on agriculture in Nigeria. And please correct me if I'm wrong, the main problem was since Nigeria had become independent, I don't think the constitution has changed in regards to land. So have you been able, has it changed? Is this why you had been able to be kind of successful in trying to fill the gap that had existed? And secondly, what kind of strategy have you used? Because you said you need to kind of use another, not pushing or not whatever challenging, but you use a different kind of strategy. And
I think we need to
know this strategy because most of us, especially in African countries, we have this problem.
Thank you so much. I think those are I think that's a very nice conversations, and we are unable to take some more questions, unfortunately, because the time is.
I've given the microphone to the sir over there who was.
Okay, and I think that because we are running out of time and it's already 2 minutes, so I would invite you all to continue these conversations. Let's go to your question and then we close the round.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Hi, I'm from the ICI office and have one question. What are the key, or what are the main? Or could you please name 3 key measures to link community-based approaches with actual national policies? That would be my question.
That's a good question also to close. So I would give them, we can go, we'll start with Agnes, and if you can just briefly in 30 seconds encapsulate, 30 seconds, counting.
Yeah, just to quickly answer her, yes, there's a manual, and I think we can share. The measure that I think we have used is, we call it grassroots advocacy. We build the capacity of the local women themselves to understand their rights and also to have skills in demanding and engaging. So grassroots advocacy in movement building is very, very key to helping them understand what issues they are, if they have evidence, and what they can actually table. Yeah.
Thank you, Agnes. So Vicky, in Spanish.
Vicky, la pregunta es, dentro de ENDA Colombia, ¿cuál ha sido la medida que has utilizado, una metodología para la contribución de lo que hace ENDA con las políticas nacionales para la mitigación?
3 palabras.
Hacer investigación, hacer diagnósticos y hacer acompañamiento de las actividades de la gente para sistematizar.
So research and systematization about the activities into the community.
Fatou? Yeah, Nicoline?
I think very important is actually understanding the link between the two and really unpacking it and figuring out where gender does fit. Because I think that we don't, I can explain in an example, but we don't have time, but where it really hit me that some of these policies have no people in them, let alone women.
Yeah, Priscilla?
Yeah, Fatou?
The linkage between the grassroots policies and the national. I think one of the things we need to do, or we have been doing, is to create awareness from the grassroots to the national level, because we don't believe in the top-down approach but bottom-up approach. That informs the policies. So whatever policies that we are doing, especially like in the Gender Action Plan, we had to consult the grassroots women organizations and the grassroots people. That is where we have the traditional and religious leaders, we have the community leaders, we have the women groups, we have the youth group, we have people with disabilities to tell us what they want to see. But because this is going to be ownership, it's not like at the end of the day, it's your own policy, it's not our own policy. But they will also be supposed to be able to implement these policies. So there is a great linkage from the national to the grassroots, from the grassroots to the national. Everything is encompassing, because at the end of the day, everybody is going to be involved. The ownership belongs to that of the people. If the people are not at the center of these policies, the policies will always end up in the shelves. But where the people are the center of it, you will see that the implementation also takes place simultaneously.
Thank you, Priscilla. Now, Fatou?
La question pour toi, Fatou, était comment tu as mesuré l'impact de votre travail à l'échelle nationale. Je pense que notamment le réseau REFEP.
Non.
Sacha?
La question c'était comment tu fais le lien entre les activités sur le niveau local vers le plaidoyer national. Comment on fait le lien?
Voilà, donc par rapport à ce lien, comme je l'avais dit, je ne l'ai pas mentionné, mais au niveau du secteur de la pêche, c'est l'organisation des femmes au niveau régional et au niveau national. Et à partir de là, maintenant, c'est cette organisation faîtière qui regroupe près de 30 000 membres, essaie d'interpeller les décideurs politiques par rapport à tout ce qui est lié au développement de leur secteur.
Merci beaucoup.
So, I will translate because I think that was important for you, the question. So Fatou is explaining that the fisher women have come together in a huge coalition, which is called the REFEPAS. It's a network that has 30,000 women fisher in this network, and they do advocacy together at the national level. So that's how they bring the local action into national policy and advocacy. And that is really important because the REFEPAS started the entire advocacy work, not only of fisher women, but all fishers in Senegal. So
thank you so much.
And
with that, I think we can close this amazing panel. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. Very important. Bravo, eh? Thank you. Thank you. It's good. Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you.
Here we can stand up. We can come closer because so Priscilla is in the picture.
A little bit nervous.
No?
Can we just quickly go outside then?
Yeah.
Bueno.